This is Real Disciples Podcast. I'm here with Pastor Jay Nemard, good friend of mine, known him for years, like a brother. And so, first of all, Jay, when did you get saved?
November 9th, 1992. I didn't get saved in church. I got saved in a hostel in South London, Camberwell.
In a hostel, yeah?
Yeah.
How
Well, cut long story short, 1 minute in university, next minute on Skid Row. I think orchestrated by God, because I was one of those tough heads. I don't think I would have gotten saved any other way. People witnessed to me before, but couldn't care less. And cut long story short, found myself homeless. Ended up in this youth hostel for teenagers, young adults, and just everything compounding. My whole life falling apart. I don't know if you remember, that time was the recession. Couldn't find a job. I mean, it was just really difficult, man. And on top of that, the struggles being mixed race growing up. It's not like now where so many kids are mixed, and being born in England, but at the same time, my dad, my mom's not Jamaican, but they moved to Jamaica, and not fitting in Jamaica.
So you was born here?
Yeah.
And what age did your family move to Jamaica?
Well, I was very young, but at the same time, you do feel like you didn't feel settled. Same thing when I came back to England at 18. Same thing, and that was really one of the crux. It really, the fact that I didn't fit in, really, my brother somehow managed okay, but me, it really wore me down. It became really bad. I mean, to the point where I began to hate everybody, man. I hated whites, hated blacks, hated mixed race people who chose sides. That's how bad it was, you know what I mean?
So you would have despised me.
Yeah?
I would have been...
Yeah, and it came really to a point. At this hostel, there was a white group, there was a black group. I just want to be left alone, man. White group wanted me to be with them. Black guy, same thing, they'll hang out with them. White kids, they'll hang out with us. And I remember one black guy saying, yeah, you could be a double agent kind of thing, and that really vexed me, it all compounded. And I remember September 92, looking in the mirror, just wanted to smash it. I mean, that's how much self-loathing, hatred, self-loathing. But I know it was coming to a point where I just felt I couldn't bottle it enough anymore. Angry all the time. I mean, angry, and so they had a Christian program at this hostel I was, and the first day I saw it, the Salvation Army stuff, I was like, oh man, later. Went up to my room. Next day, Fresh Prince wasn't on TV. It's like, okay, all right, let me go downstairs, see what these Christians are up to. And there was a mixed race guy, half black, half Asian, giving his story. His mom's people didn't like him because he was half black. Dad people didn't like him because he was half Asian. Tried to kill himself, obviously failed. Was walking the street one day and someone told him about Jesus. And he got saved, and he said God totally delivered him of all the hatred, all the anger and everything. And I remember thinking, man. And there was a room full of guys, and normally I'm the self-conscious kind of guy. I wouldn't want to be seen dead, amongst Chris. But I felt, man, I've tried everything, man. If there is a Jesus, I gotta try this, man, because I'm at the end of myself. And I remember the guy's name was Michael, same, probably a couple of years older than me. I think I was 20, he was about 21, and I prayed to receive Christ, and no lightning hit me from heaven. I was instantly delivered, but I do remember feeling different. And I remember there was a church I was going to at the time. It was like a Baptist church. I didn't know anything, and they had a retreat somewhere, and I remember going. And I remember, man, in this room, and all of a sudden, one by one, people started to cry. And like, what's going on? And boom, hit me. Everything from as a kid upwards, man, just came up, and it was just like flushed out. And instantly, man, all the hatred, all the bitterness and everything, man, just went, and I knew I was set free. And I knew Jesus was real, because I tried nothing worked. And without even trying, I got delivered from this hatred and bitterness. You know what I mean? God totally set me free, man. It was only, even for all that, the church I was going to was pretty. You see, my life had completely crashed, and the church was very elitist, kind of, all professionals and all. And, with all my baggage, I was kind of like, this guy's all kind of problems. Let's just avoid him like the plague. Hi, how you doing? I remember one time seeing the pastor come up to him, and as he saw me, as I came into his vision, he went, and he composed himself. And I realized that look. He's like, oh, no, not him. I realized, and I started to drift, I'll be honest. And, I remember one Sunday, I just didn't have the energy. I didn't go to church. And I just went out to East Street Market, man, and I got the, I think the 36 back to Camberwell. And on the bus, I saw Eminem and another brother, Trudy, and they were talking to this drunkard who wasn't listening. And so I remember talking to Trudy and Eminem, and they gave me a flyer, and I took the flyer, went home. Didn't go instantly, and but I was going through some things, and I remember praying, man, and I remember this clearly. I was in my, I'd already now moved. I got my own flat and everything, and I remember I was in the kitchen, man. I was praying, God, I really need direction. As I opened my eyes, under the table was a flyer. I maybe was there before, but I didn't notice it. And I said, I'll go this Sunday. And I went. That was July the 11th, 1993. And the sermon, it wasn't Pastor Stevens there. It was Leighton's uncle was preaching, and he preached on world evangelism, man. But three things happened to me that day. Number one, I went in, and it was this church, it was a Kurdish cultural center on Stanley Street. This wasn't a proper church building, because
that's the one behind Kennington Park.
Kennington Park, that's right. And up until this point, I've only known churches to be church
in a church building, yeah.
Yeah, and so being in this cultural center, and I was standing outside because there was cigarette smoke there was an office. These guys who, the caretakers were there smoking. I'm like, what kind of church is this? And I remember standing outside. Should I go in? Should I not go in? And then it's like diving into a cold pool. It's going to be. So I just went in. And as I was there, I heard the praise and worship. And even though it didn't look like a proper church, I really felt God speak to me and says, three things happened. This is your church. And the second thing was during the meet and greet, the girl doing the overhead projector was my ex-girlfriend, Cheryl. And I knew it wasn't an accident. And
out of all the places
you
could have walked into church,
yeah.
Out of all the churches in London,
yeah.
You walk into a church and you see your ex-girlfriend from Jamaica.
Yeah. Well, no, we already knew each other from London.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And but we had broken up a year and a half before. And the third thing was Leighton's uncle preached on world evangelism, man. It burned my heart. I mean, my heart was on fire. And I remember God spoke to me, man, and says, I want you to go to Jamaica and preach. And right there, the burning it was still burning, but I was like, what? When that old classic, yeah. Like, and I remember thinking, nah, not Jamaica. Anywhere but Jamaica. I'd rather go to Iran. I remember saying I'd rather go to Iran and preach to the Ayatollah than go to Jamaica. You know what I mean? I just did not want to do this, man. But God eventually got a hold of me, man. And I remember it's like Jonah. Jonah wouldn't listen. And I remember going to conference October 93, and I said, God, you got to really, if you want me to go, you got to speak to me at this conference. Monday went, Tuesday went, Wednesday went, Thursday went, and on Friday morning, I think it was Alvin Smith. Yeah, it was Alvin Smith preaching, and he said, some of you guys need to go back where you came from. And I said in my mind, I wasn't even born there. And then Alvin said, I don't care if you weren't born there. You need to go back.
God.
Yeah, but even then I was like, nah. But in the evening, Pastor Warner said, open your Bibles to the book of Jonah. Once he said that, I just knew it was, you know what I mean? And that was the beginning of me wanting to preach.
Just touch upon quickly, when did you get married?
I got married June the 3rd, 1995.
So you go into the church, you see your ex, and you love arts and
yeah,
all
well,
of that.
initially she didn't want to know, you know.
Yeah.
It took a few months, you know, and you know, eventually we start going out
Shows there's
again.
power in prayer.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I'm telling you.
miracles still
Yeah.
happen. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, so and how old was you when you got married?
23.
And
Cheryl was 19.
Cheryl was 19, you was
Yeah,
23.
yeah.
Okay. And how much did you, just so that people get an understanding of how things were, how much do you think you spent on your wedding?
I spent £2,000
On your everything?
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cheryl got a dress from East Street Market. I think it cost $250 or something like that.
Oh, I've outdone you.
Yeah, my suit was £50.
No. Well,
Yeah.
Francis outdone her.
Yeah.
For Francis' dress was £100.
Oh wow.
£100, and that was 2004.
Yeah.
So okay, so all right, and so so God deals with you. You get you get saved. God deals with you. You know, you're called to preach.
Yeah.
When did you first get sent out? When did you first enter the ministry?
Got sent out in November '97 to Manchester. Funny enough, you loaned me a book on the drugs trade. That was one of the books you had, and it started in Colombia, went to Jamaica, then it went to Manchester, and that's when I thought, Manchester, okay. And I remember December '96, I was at Cheryl's mum's house, and there was a Christian program that was going on in Manchester. And I was like, Manchester. And then June '97, Pastor Carnegie, Jay, what do you think about Manchester? I'm thinking, Pastor, man, I've been thinking about Manchester.
That was '97.
Yeah.
Back then in the '90s, we used to call it Gunchester.
Gunchester, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It was.
It was known as one of the few places that I knew outside of London that was still. They're not still. That actually had, you know, kind of a ghetto vibe to it.
Yeah, you remember when I moved there and you came up to help me move.
Yeah.
And all them boys were acting digi, them drug dealers on the street corner, man. Yeah, they were looking at me like we're cops or something. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like hyenas looking at us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so you go there, and you was there for how long?
We left August 2002.
2002.
Yeah, we went back to London to assist Pastor Carnegie.
And so you was there for, I remember coming there, and you was having church in like a little shop.
Yeah, shop front, man. Claremont Road.
Yeah,
that's right. Mad times, man.
And so I remember coming there a few times, and it was like nothing much was happening. And then I remember coming, and it just clicked.
Yeah.
It was totally different. You had young guys in there.
Yeah.
They were in music. You had, you had Damien and Nicholas and Cozzy, and it was alive.
It started to rock, man.
Was really,
it was really alive, man. You know what I mean, I'll be honest, after 2 years, nothing was happening. I mean, I remember coming to conference May 2000 on the verge of quitting. And I'll be honest, one thing that kept me was a testimony of Sonny Arganzoni, Victory Outreach, where he wanted to quit, and just someone talked him out of it, and a very short while later, things just broke out. And it's the same thing that happened. I remember Mark Olson. It wasn't a sermon, it was just a whole 45 minutes testimony of what God was doing in the Philippines. And that was the Monday night of the conference. If I only had the Monday night, that would have been enough, man. I wanted to go back to Manchester so badly. And less than 2 weeks later, the church, I mean, people just started getting saved. I mean, people just coming out of nowhere, getting saved. And I remember when I went back, we started doing a Friday night prayer and fasting. And people who got saved on the Sunday would come out on the Friday night to pray. You know, I mean, you didn't have to follow up on people. People were just coming to church and getting saved, and it just kept on going.
What would you say? What would you say is the shift? Would you say there was a shift in you? What would you say?
I would say that. I remember saying before I got sent out, I said, God, you got to really help me to love people.
Okay.
You know, I do remember that, you know, and you know, when you're pioneering and no one is coming or hardly anyone is coming, you're glad for anybody who comes through the church.
So you learn to love people.
You had to, man, because you know what? If you don't have people, there's no ministry.
So sorry to interrupt you, but think about it.
Yeah.
Would you not say that's the ingenious thing about pioneering?
Yeah.
That it teaches you to love people.
Yeah. Because there are people who come in with all kinds of hang-ups. And, you know, when you're pioneering in the beginning days, you have all kinds. You don't have the so-called, you know, the ideal Christian or the ideal person you want to come. People, all kinds of issues, and you just got to love them in spite of it. You know what I mean? And you know, we had all kinds of people you had to work with, and we did, because we just glad anybody would turn up. You know what I mean? And you think about it, you know, why would anybody want to come to a storefront building on the most? I mean, I remember Pastor Carnegie. I wasn't there with him, but he said he was with Dave Ford, and they were in Manchester in a Burger King, and they were talking. Pastor Carnegie said, "Yeah, I'm going down to Moss Side, to Claremont Road," and someone says, "Don't go there." You know what I mean? You know, one of the guys working at Burger King, don't, you know, I'm on the worst part of Manchester, on the worst street in the worst part of Manchester, you remember that storefront? It couldn't swing a cat in it. You know what I mean? Crazy. Yeah, and God brought people, man. You know, and so people could pass. I mean, think about it. Why would they have to come to my church? You know how many proper churches there are?
Yeah, I mean, you know? Basically, if people don't get the minds, don't get the vision of it. Yeah. It's like going into what we would know as a corner shop. Yeah. A little corner shop. Yeah. We all know what that is. Yeah. Gutting it out, and it's no bigger than that.
Yeah, no bigger than that.
And basically, we put these chairs and a pulpit. Yeah. The pulpit was literally, you could stand at the pulpit and reach the people at the front row. Yeah,
and you could only have four chairs.
Yeah.
That's how narrow the building was. And that, you know, and so you think about it, people pass all these other churches to come to yours. So you better love people, man, because they didn't have to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't have to come. There's all these proper places you could go, you know, with a lot more seasoned preachers.
I remember coming for an impact team back in the day when we used to do music ministry. Yeah. And I remember being up there, like, doing music, rapping. And as I was doing it, somebody said to me, I feel like I'm rapping in someone's front room. I feel like I'm in someone's bedroom right now, because it was so small, but it was packed. There was probably about 20, 30 people in this little space, packed. So, and there were people outside, and they would walk past and look in and put their head around and laugh. And
Yeah, I remember preaching a number of times, and, you know, because it was a big glass front window, and people are looking in going, laughing, making faces, and I'm preaching. I'm like, as I'm preaching, I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Am I mad? You know what I mean? And, you know, that's how rough it was. And I remember one guy from South London saying he came up on an impact team, and normally when he leaves, he would try and find an encouraging word. But he said he couldn't say anything because he'd be lying. So he just left.
He just left. No. So discouraging. Okay.
Yeah.
So and so from Manchester, and just before we move on from Manchester, Manchester is where Preston came from. Mm-hmm. Preston was out of Manchester. Yeah. And so, you know, Preston is a powerful, great work. Yeah. And so it kind of just shows you, you know, don't give up. Keep doing what you're doing, because you just don't know
what's gonna
ripples.
Happen. Yeah, I'll be honest, because there have been times, like I said, wanting to quit, you know, and God uses amazing, you know, people. I remember our landlord. Our landlord was archetypal, kind of money grubbing, you know, and he had no spirituality at all. I remember telling him I'm thinking of leaving Manchester, and he talked to me for an hour, and it was like God speaking to me, man. This guy is like, you know, the Balaam's donkey kind of thing, you know, the most unexpected source of God speaking, man, and convinced me to stay, you know what I mean? And I'm glad I did, because of all, you know, think about if I'd quit, I would have thought, the ministry doesn't work, you know, did I really hear from God? And, you know, this is a waste of time. And it just really shows that you just endure, because, you know, I remember Scott Lamb saying, all you got to do is outlast your problem. Your problem will pass. Just outlast
very
it.
Good. That's,
you know what I mean?
That's very good.
And that's what we, you know, that's what we had to do, you know.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay, so from Manchester, you come back and assist Rotherhithe under Pastor Carnegie. Yeah. And then Pastor Carnegie leaves, Pastor Peter comes. Yeah. Then emergency happens, you have to go to Wolverhampton. At Wolverhampton, you send out Leon. Yeah. Leon comes back. Yeah. You send out Chris. Yeah. That's
Dudley.
right. Yeah.
That's right.
And then you go from Wolverhampton to Jamaica.
Yeah.
And so, so Jamaica was basically the revisiting of the original vision that you said in the beginning.
Yeah. And be honest, for years it was lost. I kind of thought, well, maybe it was just God testing, like a Abraham, would you willing to do it? But really, and I remember 2008, I went on an impact team, and not an impact team. I went to preach, and I remember talking to Jackie Roberts, Eric Roberts' wife, and I just mentioned a few things, and she pointed to me, say, "You need to go to Jamaica." I was like a bullet hitting me in my chest.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, everything just came back.
So you went to Jamaica when?
2011, in August 2011.
Okay, and then you came back to the UK when?
September 2017, last year.
Okay,
End of September.
and then you came straight here.
Yeah, to Bristol.
Bristol, and Bristol was started when?
It was started 19 years ago, I think February, March 99.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then Bristol was started by Pastor Peter.
Peter Charlotte, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I remember coming here for impact teams.
Yeah.
It was pretty.
Yeah.
It was like the real powerhouse of Rotherhithe.
Big time.
I remember him getting the building.
Yeah.
And we interviewed him as well. We had him on the podcast, and he
Yeah.
kind of spoke about what God had done.
Yeah.
And so very good heritage. And,
Big time.
Wonderful
Yeah.
church and all that God has done here.
Yeah.
So you've been here just under a year.
Just under a year. End of this month will be a year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
End of this month.
Okay. And so the whole purpose of the podcast is basically about creating disciples, real disciples.
Yeah.
It's about creating disciples. So this essence of disciple, being a disciple, when we say a disciple, what do you see a disciple as?
Well, a disciple to me is you, as what Paul said, imparting. He said, we didn't just only impart the gospel, but our very lives as well. I think discipleship is mainly getting the gospel or the vision of what gospel Christianity, into the heart of a new person, and trying to get that person, male or female, to have that heart to reach the world for Jesus as well, reach others for Christ. It is about empowering that Christian to be equipped that they can now pass that gospel on, because discipleship is a passing on of a baton, the baton being the gospel. Being able to be equipped that they can now do the same for others. That's in a nutshell.
Okay. So one of the things I look at is when I got saved in Rotherhithe, Pastor Carnegie was there.
Yeah.
And Pastor Carnegie is probably, without debate, one of the best communicators.
Yeah, big time.
Powerful preacher, communicator.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I came into the church, the men that were really older than me in the Lord, the men that I could say would disciple me, was you.
Yeah.
Pastor Peter, it was just Peter at the time, a disciple.
Yeah.
Simeon.
Yeah.
Joel Gunya.
Yeah.
You guys were doing, the concerts and the outreaches and all of that.
Yeah.
And here we have a pastor who is guiding you guys, teaching you guys, and preaching. And when you just heard that preaching, you was like, this is the real deal. But it almost seems like a perfect combination.
Yes.
Because you've got the pastor who is preaching and leading and steering the ship.
Yeah.
So that you guys don't go off.
Yeah.
You don't start going crazy one way or the other way.
Yeah.
Crazy liberal or crazy legalistic.
Yeah.
But you guys are involved in the disciple making. If I had a question about the Bible, I would ask you or Pastor Peter.
Yeah.
I wouldn't ask. I felt like, even though I was in the body, I felt like I never had to call Pastor Carnegie.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably I don't think I called him that much.
Mm.
Not about a Bible question. I remember one time after I'd been in church for a long time and you'd already gone out, and I spoke to Pastor Carnegie about what grace meant. But I think that looking back now, this is how a church should function. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's the pastor and you having leaders. You know, one man can't do everything. You know, there's too many people. You know, especially in a church. You know, Pastor Carnegie being the preacher is, and you know the amount of people are coming. You know, one man cannot physically be everywhere at the same time. That's the idea of discipleship. You know, you are imparting what you know into others, that they are able to impart it to others. You know, it was back again what Paul says to Timothy. And the more people you have with the same vision, the easier it gets to communicate that vision to others. You know. And that's why it's so important to raise up leaders in your own church who can do some of the legwork and take the burden, you know, share the burden, so to speak, because ministry is not easy, and there's so many different dynamics to it. There's so many things you have to do. You know, sometimes I call it like, you know, the plates. You know, you ever see that guy have the stick and he's spinning the plates, you know, and he has to quickly go and get the other one before it falls. And ministry can be like that at times. And what you need is more people to help you spin the plates. Otherwise, things are going to get left. Things are going to collapse, and important things can get left behind. You know, and so it is so important to have men, you know, and women who you can impart truth to, and the vision to, that can help in that way. Everything can be facilitated. Otherwise, you know, things just get left, and you end up hurting the church in one way or the other. You know.
Do you think you can get distracted from discipleship by other things, and they seem to they produce a quicker return? So you can get distracted. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but you can get distracted by other things.
Absolutely, you know, and that's the thing. You always, you know, is what Chuck Swindoll said about the urgent versus the important. You know, the devil always try to put urgent things in your life to the neglect of the important things. You know, because everything that is urgent is important. You know, and if you can get you on that trail, he'll keep you on that.
That's you know, in that book, 7 Habits of Effective People. Is it Steve something? 7 Habits of Effective People. And he says that it's the urgent and the important. So like your health is important, but until you neglect it, it doesn't become urgent. And that's what most people live. They live always urgent. But your health is important, you know, to eat right and to exercise. And same is with spiritual things. It's important to disciple. And if you let it go, it's only after a while where you realize you haven't got no disciples. Now it becomes urgent, and it's
already too. It could be too late.
Late.
You know, a lot of times if you take care of the important things, the urgent things take care of itself. You know, and you know, a lot of time we end up chasing our own tails because we're always outing every fire rather than preventing the fire in the first place. You know what I'm saying? And
definitely.
You know, prevention is better than cure, and you know, it's always thinking one step ahead. You know, and you know, it's I say that, but it's something you always got to be aware of, that you can always get distracted and deviated from what really is important. You know, I think the Apostle Peter mentioned about, you know, the Hellenists versus the Hellenist Jews versus the ones that are native born. You know, the distribution of the widows, and you know, I mean, so listen, man, we're here to pray. We're here to devote ourselves to the Word of God. We're not here to wait on tables. And it's not that waiting tables is beneath them. Is that there are more important things to do. There are other people who can do this. You know what I mean? You know, it's not that we think ourselves better. But listen, man, we can't do both.
I think many times, I think that it's let me be careful with my words, but I think sometimes it's because of the way, let me speak of myself. Sometimes it's the way I've pastored that I've communicated the wrong thing. It's not so much the congregation had the wrong idea. I've communicated to the congregation, I'm here to put out fires. And so And so that's why they expect that.
Yeah.
You know, you communicate that. And obviously we're here to serve and wash feet and all of those things. But the reality is that if you show the congregation that you're not the chief disciple. I remember hearing a sermon by Pastor Mitchell, and I don't want to quote Pastor Mitchell, and you know, everyone quotes Pastor Pastor Mitchell says this and it becomes a law, but I do remember him, the gist of it, and he said, this is in 1970s, and he says people want the pastor to be in the men's meeting, the fellowship meeting, the pot fellowship meeting, the garage fellowship meeting, the kids meeting, the Sunday school meeting, the women's meeting. And he said, listen, I'm gonna, and this is in 1970, and I think we probably only had, he maybe had a few guys out, 3 or 4 churches at that point, 70 something, 79 maybe. And he says, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be preaching and leading and developing these leaders. That's what I'm going to be doing. And we're going to, and he starts to say what's going to happen. And what he said is actually happened. What he said is actually happened. And so we're not saying, let's not say you don't care for people and pastor people, but there has to be some element of discipleship.
Yeah, and the thing is, you sometimes you know, if you want something done, you do it yourself, and that can't work.
Yeah.
Because then you communicate to everyone, let the pastor do it. You know what I mean? And people have got to be released to fail. You know, and that's how they learn.
I think one of the wisest things I ever heard was Pastor Brown said something to me, and I said, Pastor, look, this is my problem. This is what's going on in the church. And he said to me, Courtney, you got to learn to delegate.
Yeah.
He said, you got to learn to delegate.
Yeah,
he probably told me that about 5 years ago. I'm probably still just
thinking.
Learning now. Just listen. Takes that long to filter in. It's a bit dense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about? Okay, so what I wanted to speak to you about reading, because I think the fortunate thing of coming into Rotherhithe 1996 was there was a culture of reading, and I think that's a very valuable culture to be saved into. I remember you taking me to a Christian bookshop all the time. You know, on a Saturday after outreach, we'd go Christian bookshop all the time. All over London, different Christian bookshops.
Up in Holland,
all of those things, and that became, this is what Christians do. They buy books. They read. You bought me a Thompson's Chain Reference that I still have to this day.
I remember buying it.
Yeah, it was
the Elephant in Castle.
About 20-something pound. You said you should have this. So I picked it up to buy it, and then you paid for it.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, you was like, no,
I'll
pay for that. And so back then, £20 was a lot of money. That's a lot of money back then, man. And so, when did you start reading?
Well, from my dad, from I was about 3 years old.
So 3 years old, he was reading.
Yeah, and my dad said that he once saw me. He was talking to a friend, and there was a newspaper on the floor. I was about 3 or 4, and his friend was amazed that I was reading it.
Wow.
Yeah. It says his friend was amazed that this little boy was standing on the paper and I was actually reading.
In a good year, or in a good week, let's estimate it now. In a good week, this is a good week for you.
Yeah.
How many, or month, let's say a good month, how many books would you get through in a good month?
I'll be honest, being back in England and trying to get myself back on my feet, because this has been mad.
Yeah, but we're just saying, say like you're on your feet, this is a good month. How many books would you get through?
It's hard to say. It depends on the size of the book. I could try and get through at least once a week.
One book a week.
One book a week.
One book
you know
a week.
What I mean?
That's 4 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
Depending on the book, you know.
Yeah, how deep it is.
How deep if it's a deeper book. You remember when we used to go books, Christian in Complete Armor.
Yeah.
William Gurnall. 3 volumes.
Yeah.
It took me an entire year to read those 3 volumes. But the English, the structure and the language and everything and the depth.
The depth. I mean, that book there, every paragraph is a scripture, scriptural reference.
I mean, you could get a million sermons from those books. You know what I mean?
Christian in Complete Armor, if you're serious about being a disciple and you're serious about growing in the things of God. you've got to read that book.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, if you're doing yourself an injustice. I know there's going to be someone religious out there say we don't need that. We just have the Bible. I know. Read your Bible first.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, you do
Yeah.
yourself a serious injustice. I remember reading that book, and I felt like this is the best way I could describe it. Imagine you're being bullied all the time, yeah? And then you enroll in like an MMA class, jiu-jitsu, whatever it's called, and boxing. And then after a year, you go back and someone tries to punch you out the way and you're just beating people. I'm not. By the way, I'm not authorizing physical violence, but that's how you felt after reading the book. It was like, come on, devil, let's go. All right, you want to go? Let's go. Yeah. Because it just enriched me and really helped me.
Oh yeah, that's one of the best books, and it also made me realize these guys had depth. Yeah. You think about the Puritan paperbacks, we know they're Calvinists, but they had great depth, I'd really like, but those books would take a while, biographies, you can breeze through those books. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? You could easily breeze through biographies, and but there's certain books that do take its time.
I remember, obviously I didn't finish school, and so I'm dyslexic, so I didn't really start reading till I became a Christian. But I had one book that I had bought before I was a Christian. It was called Yardie. About this guy that comes to Jamaica, and back then I was into dancehall music or bashment, whatever you call it. And so I bought this book, Yardie, and I remember reading it. Like I didn't even finish that book. I started to read it. I think I read maybe half of it. And so it talks about how he came from Jamaica and all of these places and So I remember, I'm not saved yet, but I read this book about, and I sit down in a conversation with some guys, and we was probably there smoking weed, doing a madness. And I was unsaved, obviously, I was nuts. And I remember they started talking about something, and I started to reel off all these things, and everybody went silent as I was speaking. Like I was an expert, and on everything Jamaican now. Yeah. And I was like,
You read half a book.
Because I read half a book about a guy that basically came from Jamaica to England. I'm a drug dealer or whatever, and I think they made a film about it now. But I realized how shallow you are without reading. If you don't read, you really are going to stay shallow. And the sad thing is to be in the ministry and not read.
And it's really sad because you become you start to repeat yourself.
Incestuous thinking.
Incestuous thinking, very true.
Incestuous thinking.
Nothing new to challenge you.
Amplification of errors. That's the reality. You talk, you keep saying the same thing, and not only that, you amplify it. And now you're amplifying some of the good, but also your errors. Whereas you're reading, you're balancing out certain things. And
Pastor Carnegie always said about reading as well is finding different ways of saying the same thing. Think about the gospel. The gospel is the same thing. The issues of sin. Whether it's fornication or this, that, and the other, lying. It's you have to find a different way of saying the same thing. And reading helps you to see things from different angles that you would not naturally see from yourself. I think and I'm not just trying to boost you up, Courtney. You're one of the guys I know who can think. And you can see and analyze things where I have to read it, man. I go, oh, wow, yeah, that's true. And so sometimes my thoughts are what I say. I got it from reading. You know what I mean? I don't just naturally understand certain things. When I read it and it makes it, oh, wow, yeah, that makes sense why this is that. And it makes it look like I know what I'm talking about, but I read it. Yeah. And that's one, because otherwise, like we said, it's incestuous thinking. And you're given to one trail of thought, and your preaching becomes boring.
Definitely.
And you're one groove, one groove thing. And I've seen it.
You have a hobby horse.
Yeah, hobby horse, and you start repeating things, because the only book because you're a Christian, you read the Bible, and so all the illustrations of the Bible. So if you preach on faith, you use, see a scripture of Moses crossing the Red Sea, and then you use Jesus doing this, or you use Elijah, and then the next time you preach on faith, you use Elijah as a text, and you use the rest of them again as illustrations. After a while, it becomes boring and repetitive. Whereas if you read, you have different ways of saying the same thing, because you have to keep the same thing fresh. You know, it's this. You know, it's the same thing. We same thing. You know, every week you know when you're a kid, your mom cooked the same food, but it was fresh, same food.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You didn't eat last week's food this week, and you know what I mean, last month's food this week. You know what I'm saying? It's always fresh. That's what preaching should be. It should be fresh.
And if a guy doesn't read, there's not really many illustrations in his sermons.
No.
But he'll put loads of scriptures in there.
Yeah.
And you're kind of bouncing all over this thought.
Yeah.
But it becomes abstract and it's not cohesive.
And it also becomes lumbered. I remember Pastor Carnegie, and if you remember the structure of preaching, he had a main scripture. He'd have a couple of other scriptures as well, but he didn't have 100 in it. You know what I mean? Where it becomes, and because it does, you know what I mean? Because that one scripture could go in so many different ways. Use another scripture that could go in so many different ways. He'd only use scriptures that reinforced that point he was making. It was very few.
Yeah.
And, you remember when Pastor Carnegie preached, man, an hour preaching could seem like 20 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah.
Some guys preaching 20 minutes seem like an hour. You know what I mean? And, and Pastor Carnegie talk about not wasting a good scripture.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because you could always use that one for another sermon. You know what I mean? And but it's reading. And remember, Pastor Carnegie was a avid reader, man.
Avid reader.
You know, and he the books that he got me into, again with the whole idea of discipleship. You show Jay, this book is good for you. This blah blah blah. And then after a while you start finding your own authors that you like, or your way of thinking. But he created that infrastructure.
What was that place? Bookade. Pastor Carnegie.
Yeah, Pastor Carnegie took us to Bookade.
Yeah,
I remember every Thursday I think it was.
Yeah.
We used to live there. You know what I mean?
So definitely, Pastor Mitchell always recommending a new book.
Yeah.
And so definitely reading is one of the things. Let's go back to, so obviously I remember, as I was saying, reading that book Yardie, and it kind of showed me that me being born here, of my dad being Jamaican, but me being born here kind of showed me that what I thought was Jamaican was really kind of like a pseudo Jamaican, or a very modern kind of understanding of Jamaica. And I've spoken to you before about this, where there's this transition.
Oh, yeah. I mean, before I moved to Jamaica, I remember buying about 20 odd books just on Jamaica. Biography of Michael Manley, Edward Seaga, the history, slavery, West Indian Federation, the economic collapse in the 70s, just to get understanding of the culture. Because the reality is, what we think of Jamaica. When I moved to Jamaica, I realized I only saw the tip of the iceberg. When you go there, you really see how deep the iceberg goes. And Jamaica, to me, has the Jamaicans, they say there are more Jamaicans living outside Jamaica than in it. I don't know how true that is, but there's a lot of immigrants, and Jamaicans have always been immigration people of a nation of immigrants. You think about the Panama Canal back in the early 1900s. When they were building it, a lot of Jamaicans went there to build it and stayed. There's still little pockets of Jamaicans in Panama, Costa Rica, that have been there for 100 years. You know what I'm saying? If you look at the Costa Rican national team, you see some people with English last names, and their ancestors were from Jamaica, and so they still have the local patois, though they speak Spanish and that. And but with the Windrush, 1948, there was a real, I think, paradigm shift, because a lot of people came to England, economic reasons. They were economic migrants, leaving their kids behind with aunties, uncles, grandparents, who a lot of times didn't necessarily want an extra mouth to feed or to look after. And this is one of the issues to me. I'm not fully understand why Jamaica has changed. But one of the main things is a lot of kids left to themselves, having to raise themselves up. There is, because you think of old school Jamaicans, it's all about good morning, good, even now it's still Jamaica to a slight degree, there's all this politeness and manners. And what happened when you have all of these people, and it was just England people are coming to, they were going to Canada, they were going to Panama, they're going to the United States, and you have a lot of kids who were basically left to grow themselves up. The family structure was starting to be affected because of, you know, their parents being overseas. You know, some of them would eventually join a family later on. Sometimes they never did that, you know, and that's when things started to change. Was these kids now are having to bring themselves up? You know, Jamaica's old school says, "Yeah, I'm not brought up, see." You know what I mean? They're not brought up correctly, you know. The other thing when we talked about Michael Manley was a prolific, he was a gallist. You know, he had a lot of women, you know what I mean? And he said he's going to get rid of the stigma of bastard, no bastard there. And it really impacted Jamaica because there's all these kids. I mean, you think about it, 86% of Jamaicans, the illegitimacy rate in Jamaica is 86%. That's nearly 9 out of 10 kids are born illegitimately, you know? And it has really changed.
Do you know what it would have been before he said that?
No, it wouldn't have been as prolific. Obviously, it would have been there, you know. But you know what? One thing people don't realize is the revival of 1861 really impacted Jamaica, where marriage was a normal thing. You know, people getting married. Obviously, there are people living in fornication, all that kind of stuff. But you know, the family structure was there. People looked after each other. You know, Master Jones is sick. You know, you go run with some soup and you go and give it to Master Jones, and people looked after each other, man. But things started to dramatically change with the mass immigration and with Michael Manley and the economic collapse.
Michael Manley would have been what time? What day? Was that?
He took over in 1972. He was Prime Minister in 1972 to 1980.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, Jamaica, you got to understand this. Jamaica from 1962 to 1972 was growing at 6% a year every year. You know, now obviously it wasn't a first world country. It was getting there. And he came with his social. This is why I'm telling you. I know we get a bit political. I am not into socialism at all. I've seen socialism with my own eyes. And you know, Corbyn is not a charismatic. Michael Mann was a very charismatic guy. Corbyn is kind of like a mild version of him, man. But I've seen the devastation that it caused. That a country growing from 6% every year to a country that lost everything. I mean, all of his reserves destroyed. Remember, Michael Manley was the one who says, "We have no place for millionaires in Jamaica. If you want a millionaire, if you want to be a millionaire, there's 5 or 6 flights every day to Miami, you know." And for the next 6 months after his statement, every flight was filled with people leaving the country.
So, all right, let's end this off with some books that you would say really have impacted your life.
You know, we touched on one, Christian in Complete Armor.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. In just the depth and the insight. You know, it's an awesome book. Another book that really helped me in the early days was Treasures Out of Darkness by Sonny Arganzoni, Victory Outreach, just pioneering. And pioneering, I mean, it really helped me in Manchester. Pioneering and having a heart, how hard it is to pioneer a church, and the struggles of a pioneer pastor, and to see breakthrough. You know, that was a real book of real impact in my life. You know, there are many books I would say, but those are two of the main ones.
And from a perspective of preaching, what book has impacted you?
The Primer of Homiletics by John Edwards is, to me, you know, there are many good books, Preaching and Preachers by Martin Lloyd-Jones, The Mystery of Preaching, James Black, all of these old school books. But to me, the Primer of Homiletics by John Edwards, just the passion of preaching is communicated. I mean, he goes through the basics of how to write a sermon, you know, homiletics and all that kind of stuff. But it's just the call and the dignity of preaching, and the passion, and the you know, this is the big deal, man, of being a pastor. It really hits you, you know, just the passion communicated. You know, another great book would be the Power in Prayer by Ian Bounce.
Yeah.
You know, that is also just reading the first few pages just makes you just want to put it down and just go find somewhere
Yeah,
and pray.
definitely.
You know,
Definitely.
you just want to find some. I mean,
That's one that every 6 months you can just pick it up.
Yeah. If you feel down just pick up that book, man. It'll send you to the moon. You know what I mean? Those are some, to me, the books that really helped me. You know.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading Turnaround Churches by George Barna. The book is basically about churches that were once doing well, that kind of lost its way, and how to actually get it back on track.
Okay.
You know, and it's a very insightful book. It's a very counterintuitive in the sense that things you would think you should do, you shouldn't do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's it.
Yeah.
We got a lot. Appreciate that. We'll keep you in prayer. Keep us in prayer.
Big up yourself.
And mash up your ting.
Yeah.
Thank you.